Thank you, everyone, for your presence and your attention. Thank you, John, for opening up this morning so beautifully. Thank you, Kristen, for sharing that really important thinking about where the terrain of mindfulness and compassion and how to sort of pull things apart. And I'll refer to some of the thinking that you've done in trying to explain what the biological scientists have to offer, have to bring to this conversation. I'm going to start out with a little review slide for those of you who've taken anatomy at any point. A lot of what we focus on in trying to understand mindfulness, be it M1, which is, as I understand it, a real ability to focus your attention, or M4, the fully open-hearted, wisdom-infused way of existing in the world, is to look at the nervous system, right? Look at the brain. Look at the processes that communicate with the brain. We think we divide up the nervous system also into central components, peripheral components. It's all one very richly interconnected, interdependent, interactive system. And I'd like to hearken John's metaphor of the instrument, right? So what I'm talking about is the instrument, which has many parts, which are all very interactive. We are not in the time of phrenology, of looking at one little bump and saying, well, that means you're compassionate, right? We have many systems. I'm going to walk you through the ones that seem to be really promising in giving us more information about mindfulness and compassion, or the intersection between them. So the first structure I'd like to talk about is a cranial nerve. So the brain is its own little lump of, populations and clusters of neurons. And then it has these long processes, and that's just a fancy word for bundles of fibers that go throughout the body. One of these cranial nerves is called the vagus nerve. It's the 10th nerve, comes out of the brainstem, and it goes all over the body. Vagus means wandering, and it has remarkable influences all over the body. There's two that I want to focus your attention on. One is that it imparts parasympathetic influence on your heart rate. People are, what's parasympathetic? Your parasympathetic nervous system is the ensemble of parts of your body, organs other than your brain, that allow you to feel calm, relaxed, to focus on things like digestion, affiliation, friendship, connection. So the vagus nerve does this to your heart. It slows down your heartbeat when you're exhaling. Really little interesting fact when you think about how many contemplative practices involve paying attention to the sensation of air coming out of your nostrils when you're exhaling, right? Slow that down, you're strengthening your vagus nerve, right? You're giving yourself something called vagal tone. When we look at vagal tone in the lab, and this is a lot of Dakkar's research, as well as a couple other wonderful local people, Wendy Mendez at UCSF, when you look at vagal tone and relate it to behavioral qualities, people who have better vagal tone are calmer, right? They tend to be more resilient. They tend to recover from stress more readily. Steve Porges, another important thinker in this area, thought the vagus nerve, or purported that the vagus nerve was sort of the foundation of human social affiliation, right? We come into the world ready to bond with our parents. We continue throughout life, bonding with friends, with romantic partners, etc., coworkers, and in the grand M4 version of mindfulness, the planet, right? So we have these mechanisms, we have this biology that puts us in a position of being ready to connect and being able to calm ourselves. I put the last bullet sensitive to safety, and safety has come up both in Kristen and John's discussion. Being safe, having a sense of not threat, not being in a position where somebody is going to compromise your safety, is really important to mindfulness and compassion. And we know this biologically. When you're stressed, when you're doing this self-narrative, what happened 5 seconds ago? What might happen in 10 seconds? What did I do wrong? How did I fail, right? That stress, vigilant, unsafe thinking makes it really hard to be both mindful and compassionate. Let's go on to the next slide. The other system that I want to invoke is really based on a neuropeptide called oxytocin. And we have this wonderful little molecule that circulates in our bloodstream and also in the blood that supplies our brain. What is oxytocin for? Well, its evolutionary purpose is, on the one hand, to enable breastfeeding, right? If it's happening in your body, it's functioning that way. It contributes to the sensations we feel during intimate contact. It is involved in feeling relaxed because you have a confidant or an ally or a partner in presence when you know you're going to be subjected to some kind of stress or threat. In research on oxytocin, since oxytocin is too big to cross the blood-brain barrier, that means you can't inject it into the veins and then have it do something in the brain. The best way to get it into the brain is to squirt it up the nose, okay? When researchers have done this, people who are in the oxytocin condition exhibit more trusting, more cooperative, more readily pro-social behaviors. In a recent study that Wendy Mendez, who I mentioned earlier, published in an oxytocin condition, those who had oxytocin squirts also showed, interestingly, and this is going to speak to the interdependence of these systems, a greater vagal flexibility, a greater sensitivity in their vagus nerve to outer stresses. So they were better able to recover from it. They were more sensitive to the threat itself, okay? And this is interesting, right? This idea of flexibility rather than suppression, rather than I'm just calm all the time and I can handle the world without any upset, right? It's important to feel your suffering. And your vagus nerve has to back off and let you feel something and respond, but then it has to pop back into the story and help you recover. That flexibility, it's turning out, is a more interesting scientific measure than simply how strong is your vagal hammer, okay? Let's go to the next slide. I'm gonna walk you into a terrain of brain science, now we're moving up into the brain, that is typically studied in rodents. Why? Because these structures are so deep in the brain, right? They're in the brainstem, the midbrain. This is what's folded up underneath your wrinkled cortex on the outside. It's evolutionarily super old, right? It's what lets parents take care of their kids until they're 45 years old, right? Because of that, it's hard to reach, right? We can't mess with that area without compromising some basic life function in humans. So we know a lot about it in rats. There are these hypothalamic midbrain circuits that speak in the language of oxytocin, and what they do is make you take care of people. They make parents take care of babies. In rats, if you damage this area, they will no longer nurse their pups. They will no longer protect them. Okay? In adults, we know that these same kinds of parent-infant relationships, connections, are super important. This experience in life, coupled with some of what you come into the world with genetically, really shapes this circuitry. If it's well shaped from a sense of safety, from an experience of protection by your community, parents, care providers, then you have this rich, strong basis for making positive connections throughout life, for feeling affection towards humans, right? And I put this in the M3 category. Right now, you can orient to others. The next area or structure or system I want to describe to you is, which John actually brought up, is this sort of somatic awareness / empathy circuitry. Okay, so the insula is this part of our brain that gets information about what's happening in our bodies. Okay, so your stomach gets nervous, or your shoulders tense up, or your viscera feel funny because you're nauseous or something like that. That's all being tracked by your insula constantly. Okay? We may or may not pay attention to it to a larger or shorter degree. To the extent that we do, it becomes useful, informative in how we react in that moment. Right? If we're in the present moment, part of that is being aware of what's happening in our body and how our bodies are responding to a present moment. The research that you're looking at here is studies of empathy. What we know about the insula and some of the structures that it tends to fire with, which is the midline structures, right, that tell you about, or that represent your thoughts about yourself, is that they respond to pain, right, your own feeling, but they also are sensitive to witnessing other people's pain. So this is a classic study where you look at, if you're in the scanner, you're laying down, you're shown pictures. Some of them are of a hand that's being shut in a door, right? That looks like pain. The other is well matched perceptually of a hand on a car, right? When people look at this, their own pain circuitry fires, right? We are exquisitely built to be sensitive to other people, right? When we want to feel compassion, the beginning of that is being receptive, being attuned to the suffering of other people. We are biologically endowed with this capacity. Next slide. The next system I want to tell you about is a much higher order system. This is the most recently developed part of our nervous system, the integrative higher order cortex, okay? The area I want to point you to has been well studied by a pioneering researcher, Rebecca Sachs at MIT, and she's really been able to show that this area, the temporal parietal junction it's called because it's really at the nexus between the temporal lobe and the parietal lobe. This area is really critical to understanding what other people's expressions mean. If we think of it as sort of an expertise area, social expertise area, being able to see someone emote and go, I know what that means, I can name that. That's jealousy. And they're jealous because of this other context that they're in. I can put myself in their shoes because I've existed in the world and I've built up this expertise. This is an important structure for understanding other people. There's a recent study drew a relationship between the density of neural connectivity in this area and people's willingness to be altruistic, okay? So as I'm walking through these structures as if they're all independent, please hold in mind the reality, which is that they're all super interconnected and interdependent. And one has the capacity to be dramatically influential in the other. Okay, let's move to the next. The next structure I want to focus on is perhaps the most high order, most human endowed part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex. Okay, this is the structure. These are the people, and I can only say this because this is part of where I did a lot of my training, who really might have pulled mindfulness a little bit too far into the cognitive area, right? These people who said, oh, mindfulness, this must be about being able to focus your attention, think clearly, control your attention, shifting this direction or staying here or maintaining an idea for a long time, right? Working memory, this is what John was talking about earlier in the work of John Teasdale. That really is kind of at the M1 level, right? Being able to hold your attention in a specific way, and the frontal cortex is essential for that. But again, I'd like to shift the orientation from we want to be able to have this muscle that forces our attention in this way that we think is right, to we want to have this muscle that opens our awareness such that we can receive what's coming into our minds openly and non-judgmentally and invoke other structures that are important for socially connecting with others, right? Not allow our sort of pathway of neural activation to go from frontal cortex right to the midline and what does this mean for me and what do I get out of it, right? So this figure, I'll just walk you through it a tiny bit. The DLPFC is the darker gray blob, egg-shaped thing on the top. And what the arrows are showing is how richly interconnected that structure is with other structures that I've been talking about already, and structures I'll tell you about momentarily. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex will determine which other circuits are going to emerge and contribute to your experience in the moment. So strengthening that muscle with the wisdom of, I want to receive and face the suffering rather than I want to control and sort of narrow my focus to something that I think is right is what I think a more promising and future orientation. Okay, next. The next slide really is meant to open your awareness around two very general purpose systems in the brain, right? Our pain system and our pleasure system. Okay, we have these two circuits, the pain system, really sensitive to threats, stress, The pleasure system uses dopamine to allow us to feel this sensation of, I don't know, niceness, right? It's a little bit different than oxytocin because it's more implicated in things like eating chocolate cake, right? Or maybe winning a big award, right? So the point of me showing you these two slides, because you're like, what does this have to do with mindfulness and compassion? Is that these two slides really, or these two systems, really kind of motivate people in any direction that they're going to end up going. And to the extent that these systems are the connections between these systems and other systems that are involved in mindfulness and compassion are strengthened, right? To the extent that we connect our reward circuitry to our social evaluative expertise circuitry, it's going to determine the extent to which we feel inclined to orient to another person's state or to take another person's perspective. Let's go on to the next slide. So this last slide, I'm going to test everyone on the very small terms written on the bottom here, so get ready. No, don't worry about those very small terms. The point of this slide is that, again, the brain, the nervous system, the body, I didn't even really mention other really important ways that people measure compassion and mindfulness, which is to look at biomarkers in the blood and the saliva, right? How stressed are you? And I don't mean to leave those out. I just acknowledge the fact that they are intimately interconnected with what's happening in your brain, right? What's happening in your brain, what's happening in your body. It's all a feed-forward, feedback system. This three-part little overlapping Venn diagram is meant to represent your parenting circuitry, right? Which structures are involved in parenting, which are involved in stress, and which are involved in reward, and to show you how overlapping they are, right? The brain is very multi-purpose. It's very efficient. There is no one system for one function, right? Systems contribute to multiple functions, and it's our practice, our life experience, our choices that define how these Venn diagrams get organized, right? How much of your resource of this particular structure is going to contribute to feeling reward in the presence of others versus feeling stress in any given moment. So next slide. So I'm going to end with a kind of what I think summary of what direction each of these systems can go that would maximally bring you towards a more M4 type of mindfulness, a compassionate, wisdom-infused mindfulness. Number one, stronger vagal tone and autonomic flexibility, the ability to respond adaptively and quickly to what's happening around you. A rich and well-productive oxytocin system. Hang out with other people. Just being in the presence of friends helps you produce more oxytocin. Being around babies, oxytocin, lots of fun. Hypothalamic midbrain social bonding tone, right? So these structures that use oxytocin, to the extent that you spend time with people, have positive experiences, open with them, feel supported, you are strengthening these muscles. Frontal lobe flexibility, right? Letting your frontal lobes support present moment open awareness, non-judgmental present moment open awareness. That is merely a function of practice, right? That's why practice helps these circuits fire, and the more they fire, the stronger they get. Increasing connections between your reward and social engagement expertise networks, right? Becoming more intrinsically joyful in the presence of other people, right? This is, to me, a strong piece of being interested in compassion, being interested in being altruistic, allowing your nervous system to guide you in that direction. And then there's two suggested sort of, shifts in the other direction, right? Reducing connections between your fear and vigilance systems and other people, right? Reducing those senses of competition and feeling inadequate because somebody else around you gave a better talk than you just did. Reducing the sort of over-regulation or extra attunement of your sort of emotions by your frontal lobes. Like resisting the temptation to think of mindfulness as, I'm going to quash my emotions. That's not the point, right? The point is to feel your emotions richly, let your incredibly evolutionarily adaptive, wise emotional states guide you in the direction that is most useful. And they'll do that if you don't let them drive this narrative, midline, self-focused thinking. Next slide. This is my little go out and do it. I'm going to take an extra 30 seconds. I'm sorry. My next 30 seconds is, I don't really have any poetry that I can remember from my life, but but I want to say one thing that I remember when I was participating fully, but I guess maybe multitasking, sorry. I was thinking, what do I remember? And the thing that I remember, it made me realize another really important part of the story, which is the interdependence, the common humanity piece. Okay, this is not something the neuroscientists or the biological scientists understand very well. Lucky for us, Dacher is spearheading research on awe, this emotion that really does do that. When you feel awe, you start to feel connected to everyone around you. It's so interesting. We're looking forward to that. The quote that I'd like to share is one that is burned into my neural circuitry that came from 2 years of forced Latin in high school. It's, I'm going to say it in Latin first. De gustibus non disputandum est. Okay? Means there's no accounting for taste. And I thought, well, what does that mean? But actually, that's a really powerful message. When I see other people and I'm like, I don't get that person. Why do they do that? You know what? There's no accounting for taste. They're just like me. So thank you so much. It's been a privilege.